All right, so you are the first field hockey athlete I've had on this
Oh, wow.
podcast. Yeah. So
Exciting.
let's just start with why field hockey? Why not lacrosse? Why not hockey? Why not soccer?
I actually played lacrosse in high school and I was originally supposed to play in college too, but that's a whole other story. But yeah, I started field hockey when I moved to Pennsylvania in seventh or eighth grade. I had never heard of it before I moved to the Northeast. My dad's in the Army, so I've moved around a lot. And when we got to PA, I was looking for a new sport, and field hockey was something that a lot of my friends were doing. So I just tried it out, and ended up falling in love with the sport. It's the first time I had like done sports all my life, but it's the first time I really felt like confident on like doing a sport. I just loved it. And so I played all the way through. And then my junior year, I was like, I want to keep playing. This is fun. And so that's when I started looking into college and found a school and a team I was really excited about. And yeah, the rest is history.
So Allegheny College is D3, yes.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
What was the recruiting like with a sport that you kind of didn't really know very well with a
Yeah.
team that was just starting?
Yeah. It was a really, everyone's recruiting story and recruiting experience is really different. No one else in my family had ever even tried to go through the recruiting process. So my parents were very supportive, but they didn't have a lot of knowledge about like what the process would look like. I was on a club team, so my club coaches were honestly the biggest knowledge bases that I had. I knew I wanted a school that I could really be a part of, that it had a really big community feel. And also one that I could be an undecided major. That was a really big thing. I wanted a small school that I could go and just learn for the year, and then kind of figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And I actually heard about Allegheny through a friend of the family. And when he told me about it, I was like, yeah, but there's not a field hockey team, and I really want to play field hockey. And he was like, well, they're actually starting one. So I've reached out to the head coach, and she came and I sent her my recruiting videos. She came to one of my games. And I really fell in love with the school. It was the first time when I stepped on campus, I was like, oh, this is my home. Like I felt a really big sense of peace that I was supposed to be there. And I also just fell in love with my head coach at the time. She is still a really big mentor in my life. And she was just a very infectious character, very loving, and had a lot of passion for the game. And we share a lot of core values. So we just really instantly clicked, and it just gave me a lot of peace. And so I was like, okay, this makes sense, let's do it.
Yeah. I will say that the majority of athletes that I have on this podcast, when I start out the interview with tell me your recruiting journey, they end up at schools that have a storied history. They're
Yeah.
not being convinced that the program is worthy of existing. What
Yeah.
was that conversation like when you didn't really have the program didn't exist? I mean, what were they recruiting? What was their recruiting pitch?
Yeah, I mean, when I got there, our field hadn't even been built yet. So it was like a huge trust process. And really just, I think for me, I hadn't had a great experience in terms of team dynamics in high school. I was very much always the outsider, on every team that I was on. I was kind of like faking it to be a leader, and then it just never really worked out in my favor. And so I really, really wanted a team where there wasn't going to be this weird seniority where like, the freshmen have to pick up all the gear and like there's a bunch of hazing. I didn't want a team that like playing time was going to be a political thing where it's like all of these behind the scenes, debates going into who gets to play. And I kind of had this really optimistic view that joining a new team and being on the inaugural team would give me the chance to kind of create a team culture that I loved and I was really proud of. Um, and so I just, yeah, I kind of was like really blindly optimistic that it was going to, not that it was going to be easy, but that we were all going to be on the same page and we were going to want to create this team that was kind of like my ideal, dream team, not only just winning games, but just, actually having a beautiful team dynamic. Kind of like, I don't know, I think my dream was that it was going to be like the Richmond team in Ted Lasso, where yeah, it's not perfect, but everybody gets along and there's this deep sense of love and trust and you're happy. And yeah, it didn't end up being like that, but that was really my goal. And I thought that creating a team was going to be the best way to find that.
I know that you ended up as a captain, but when
Yeah.
you're starting a team dynamic, how do you assert yourself into those roles?
I would say that for our first season, it really just came super naturally. Obviously, you need captains for each game. And we voted on captains on a week by week basis. We had a player of the week and a player of whatever the previous game was. And those were the two people that were going to be our captains and represent us. And so the first like 2 or 3 months of playing, in my opinion, it worked really well. The natural leaders on the team kind of just gently asserted themselves. And it wasn't like one person. There was really like a panel of us that were pretty vocal leaders, pretty active leaders, that just kind of came naturally. My freshman class, I think, was 13 people. So there was a lot of personalities and a lot of forces, but we had one junior, we had one upperclassman, and she was kind of like the glue on our team. We all looked to her. And then it just kind of happened naturally. And by the end of our freshman year was a time that we were like, okay, we actually kind of need a captain to do off-season stuff. D3 has so many rules about what you can and cannot do in an off-season, and when your coach can be there, when you coach can't be there. So it's really common to do captain's practices and have like the leaders on the team run you through things. And so I ended up kind of being appointed to a captain position halfway through my freshman year by my head coach. Um, and I was just like, okay, I'm going to be honest, I didn't want to do it. I was very like, nope, this is not going to work well. I don't want to be seen as an enemy to my teammates. But my head coach, like I said, we had a really trusting relationship, and she was like, this is something I need you to do, and it's also something you need to do. So I just kind of trusted her and went with it. Yeah, so it's been wild.
I think it's interesting that one of your biggest reasons for not wanting to assert yourself into that captain role was because you didn't want to be hated by your teammates. You didn't want to make an enemy of yourself. What what within the team dynamic would have led you to that conclusion?
Yeah, so I'm a very vocal person. I don't have any sort of poker face. If I'm upset or frustrated, it shows. And so I had always really been feared. Like, I just was aware that I rubbed people the wrong way. I had had incidents earlier in the season where like a teammate had come to me and said, "Hey, we don't like how you're communicating." And I was like, "Oh, that's really good to know." Um, and also just like when you're on a team, you get the vibe. You understand like, oh, I'm not being invited to hang out off the field with these girls. So they really probably don't like me that much. And it was things like that that made me really hesitant, where I was like, I don't know if I want to be like, I'm already kind of an outsider on the team. I don't know if I want to be like put into this role where I'm going to have to, I mean, a captain is kind of a love-hate job where you are either really good at it or you're really bad at it. And I also was just honestly more concerned about what other people were going to think about me and consider how I was doing than how I actually, if I never even really thought, does Becca want it? I was just so focused on how are my teammates going to think about me and perceive me. Um, there was another girl on the team who had been very vocal that she wanted to be a captain. And my coach didn't pick her. And so I was like, oh, now there's going to be this war and it's going to be all this drama and I don't want it. Um, and so, yeah, those were my big hesitations, as I felt like by accepting the captain role, I was just going to have instant drama in my life. And I was like, I don't really want that. And so I don't know. It's weird. I think now, like, what should I have done it? Should I not have? I'll be honest, I didn't really feel like I had a choice at the time. It was something like my coach asked me to do. I was gonna do it. But yeah, it was kind of just a fear of being disliked, of being ostracized. Um, And I had done that in high school and it was awful. And I was afraid that it was going to happen again.
What was it that you think your coach saw in you that raised you into that captain role that they believed you could do, but you didn't?
This is actually a running joke that I have with my coach. I was like, why me? And she was like, I'll tell you when you're older. And that was kind of like the running joke. Her big thing was like, you need to be able to see it in yourself. Looking back, I will say like we have very similar core values. And I think that is something that we instantly connected on, this attitude of positivity, but also just gratefulness, recognizing people and, being open to ideas and open to just saying yes, but, just in a really kind way. I think I'm also a Christian. And so I think that was part of it. We both were Christians. And I think she saw that those values in me that the team really needed. It kind of needed like a softer love-based approach. And that was something that was really important to me. But yeah, I'm also just like, I think a natural leader. I'm a very big problem solver. If I see something that's like wrong or inefficient or problematic, I am not one to sit by and just let it be. And so I think that kind of initiative and go-getter attitude was also something that she admired. I don't know. It's hard to say. I don't want to put words in her mouth, but yeah, I think it was just honestly our shared values and the openness and respect that I had for her of if, I'm going to respect you and I'm going to respect my teammates the best I can. And also my willingness to make mistakes. I am very not necessarily comfortable with making mistakes, but I'm very open to the fact that I'm an imperfect human. And so, going into the start of my freshman season, my biggest thing was if I'm doing something wrong, just tell me. I want to be coached. I want to be better, a better teammate, a better player. And so that was something I said all the time to my teammates was like, let me know if I'm doing something wrong. Like I'm happy to change. I'm happy to compromise and fix it. And so I think that was something else that probably stood out to her. Not many people are so open to saying, oh, I might be wrong, so help me figure out if I'm wrong. Most people are kind of like, no, you're in the wrong, so you fix yourself first.
I'm going to bring the next question back to types of captains because I do talk to a few coaches on here about coaching philosophy, how to coach and implement mental health strategies within your team. And I end up talking about coaching strategies. How do you pick captains? What is the culture of your team and how does picking captains, how is that process implemented? How do you identify that your team needs softer love?
I think for me, this idea of like a foundation of love is something that in my own life is really important, but I saw on all of my teams, like, and I would say now the number one issue with my team when we left is that we don't love each other. There isn't this sense of you are my teammate and I'm going to be there for you and help you no matter what. But also just I love you no matter what. That kind of love just isn't really there. And I think when you don't have a mutual love, and maybe you might say respect, I think respect is the same. Like when you talk about needing to respect teammates, it's just love. But without it, like you're just going to crack. Like when you go through hardships, if you don't love one another, it's so much easier to fall apart. When you don't love each other, it's easy to snap. It's easy to just really not work as a group. But when you kind of start from a base of love, you're willing to sacrifice for one another. And that's something that I've always felt is like the glue of a team, is needing to just have love with each other. And for us, like we knew going into it, like it's going to be a rough start. We were in a really competitive conference. We knew like we have 13 freshmen. Of those 13, I think 10 of us started, maybe 9. But so like we were a young team. We had 3 or 4 like sophomores and older. They hadn't played field hockey since their senior year of high school. We didn't have any transfers, so we knew we were not going to win games. Like we knew this is going to be a little bit of a struggle bus at first. And the more that we were able to rely on each other and kind of, make those connections, the more that like when we are losing games, it's not going to hurt as bad. And I will say, I think we went 2-14 my freshman year. Like we won 2 games. It was so hard. I don't remember it ever being painful. I don't remember it like ever being like it was painful because I was like, we're not scoring and this is frustrating. But like at the end of every game, I came off with such a sense of gratitude. And I think it's because our team started off spending so much time together and spending so much and really investing in our team. And I because that's where we started, I think it helped us a lot. And we kind of lost touch of that base as we went through. And COVID changed my team so much. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is if you don't have love on a team, you're never really going to get anywhere. You might be able to win a couple games, but when it comes to, how each member of your team is able to pour into the team, if they don't have a love for their team, it's just not going to work. So I don't really know if that answers your question. That was just a long tangent of me talking, but yeah.
Speaking of COVID, you had no sophomore season. I mean, you have this team who now has a full season under their belt, and you have no rebound season. I mean, you're practicing what, 3 at a time, 5 at a time, maybe?
Yeah.
How do you
It was
maintain that team energy that you were talking about being so positive when you're not practicing as a team?
so we didn't frankly. It was, COVID. When I look back on my college career, I mourn what my team could have been had COVID not interrupted us. And I mean this even like we lost that spring season of my freshman year. So this time where we were going to be able to really go back to the foundation and work, we got sent home the day before spring practices were supposed to start for us. And, I think that loss and then the unknown of going into at first it was like we're going to be able to play a couple games, and then it was like you're playing no games, and then it was you're not going to even be able to practice together, and then it was like okay, you can practice in groups of 6 but you can't be within 6 feet of each other. It just completely shifted everything that we were working towards. And hindsight's always 2020. There are so many things we could have done differently, we could have done better. I don't blame my coaches or, my team for how we responded. It was miserable. And it was really hard. And, I personally was absolutely terrified because one, no one wants to get sick. And at the time, like we didn't really know what COVID was. Some people were dying from it who were perfectly healthy. And so I was definitely really afraid of that. But I think even more so, I was afraid of getting in trouble. And my
Oh no, Becca, where did you go? Hello. Oh no, Becca. She's frozen. Bye, Becca. Oops. Well, it's torrentially downpouring here right now, so I figure that's why she just left. We'll see. I'm messaging her now to see what if she can come and rejoin. All right, she's back. Hooray!
Hi, sorry, we lost
Hello.
power.
Yeah, it's raining on my end of the Zoom, so I
Yeah,
figured that it may have been me, but you just froze and then left the meeting. And I'm
yeah,
like,
we
oh
lost.
no, come back.
We're in a tornado watch. I don't think there's
Totally.
actually gonna be a tornado,
Yeah.
but so okay, sorry about that.
We were
Hopefully that.
talking about how COVID had canceled the
Yeah,
season, derailed
yeah.
everything. You had
So
no
I
team
think,
chemistry anymore.
and I think, the two big parts of it were, one, we lost the momentum in terms of our team chemistry. We brought in, I think, 10 the next class. And so that was 10 freshmen that we weren't able to see. We were barely able to talk to. But also, those 10 freshmen didn't have a season. And there's really no way to describe, unless you've been on a team, how a season and traveling and playing games bonds a team. When you're spending, especially for us, we played schools in Indiana. So we had 9-10 hour bus rides at least once a season, and we were on the road all the time. So from like my freshman year, that's how I got to know my teammates, was we were stuck in rooms together, and we shared beds and we're sharing rooms and we were with each other all the time. The freshmen after me didn't get that. And so we didn't know them. And that was like, looking back, we never really spent as much time as we should have. Like, we did team bonding during COVID, but it was like sitting around in a circle and talking and like sharing fun facts. Like, it wasn't the same. And also, we stopped progressing on the field. We were trying to do skills and drills, but it was really just conditioning. Like, I remember we would have hour-long practices and it was just 45 minutes of running. We would barely even pick up a stick. And it's just hard because when you're not allowed to be within 6 feet of each other, there's not a lot you can do. So yeah, we definitely didn't progress as much as we should have. And I think they're also one of the things that became kind of a really big issue on the team that was born from COVID, was there was now an excuse to not show up and to not do things. You could say, I can't come because I have to quarantine or I'm afraid of getting COVID. So then you could miss lift. And you could not come to practice because, you were sick. If you had a headache, you couldn't come to practice. If you felt sick at all, you weren't allowed to leave your room. And then you would have to go get tested and go to quarantine. So it became really easy to have an out, to have an excuse to not show up and put in the work. Um, and that mentality became really infectious on the team. It became really difficult to kind of motivate people to put in the work now when you don't even know when you get to play again. Like, it's really a hard thing to fight. And so yeah, I would say those were like the big ways that COVID just set us back so much. It's insane to me to think about what we would have been able to accomplish had COVID not interrupted us.
That is a fascinating byproduct of COVID because I talk to athletes who have been impacted by COVID, whether it's their freshman, sophomore, junior, senior year, whatever it may be. And we end up talking about the mental toll of COVID, but we don't talk about how easy it was to get out of training.
Yeah.
And that has a direct correlation to how you do the next year.
Right. And I mean, I don't, again, it's hard for me on the one hand, I'm really mad about things. And I remember being so angry at my teammates. I'm like, why are you not coming? But at the same time, like, I want to give that grace of like, we had no idea. For all we know, at the time, all we knew was that maybe we were working our butts off to just not play for another year. Like, we had no way of knowing. And if you don't have that like inner drive and that inner, I just want to be better to be better mentality, you're not like, what's the point? Like, what's the point of anything? And so I get it, but it really just made it, you know, as a team, I think we just lost our love for the sport a little bit, but also just what's the point of any of it, when you don't even know what's coming? And the freshmen didn't get to experience our team culture at all. So they didn't even know what they were fighting to get back to, like they didn't get it at all.
Yeah. And it's hard to maintain a culture when you have a fourth of your team that's not bought in.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you're also losing people who are like, okay, well, I can either go to practice or I can go to a party this weekend. But if I go to the party this weekend, I can't go to practice because then I could get my teammates sick, or I have to lie about going to the party. And so it's just like that aspect of it too was so difficult to, really like be like excited about, of like, you have to sacrifice everything of like your social life just to be able to go and practice 3 times a week when you're just going to be running. Maybe you'll do some drills and passing.
Man, I saw in your hidden opponent article that mentality was kind of what started the depression and the anxiety
Yeah,
feelings.
I will say COVID really changed my, it really affected my own personality. I became very comfortable with being alone. I spent most of my sophomore year in my dorm room doing nothing, um, partly because I was afraid of getting sick. I was more afraid of getting in trouble. I was so afraid of breaking a campus rule, getting sent home. I was afraid that of getting COVID and then getting my team sick. I felt this insane pressure to not be the one that, caused the issue. Um, and I also was so paranoid about my teammates not going to parties, not going and breaking the COVID rules, because I felt like that was my responsibility. Looking back, it was not my responsibility. It wasn't. But I was like, it is my responsibility to keep my teammates safe and healthy. And if one of them gets COVID, it's my fault. And the entire team is ruined because of it. And that mentality for me forced me to kind of stay inside my bubble. But also, I was like checking snap maps to see where my teammates were. I was sending out text messages. I was being really weirdly controlling, and I shouldn't have been, but I didn't know how to trust my teammates, or that wasn't my job at all. No one told me it was. I just kind of made that up. And I would say I never took the time to really process how my sophomore year impacted my own mental health or how it affected my team. None of us really stopped to say, we don't know each other, and we haven't talked to each other deeply in a year. And because we never stopped and did that, it just made it so easy to continue with the norm when we got started my junior year, that nobody was on the same page. We had a new head coach. We didn't have an assistant coach. We had essentially 15 freshmen who had never stepped on a collegiate field before. And it was just kind of a shit show, or, it was just a mess. Like, and no one really stopped to say, let's evaluate what we've been through and create a new team motto, create a new team goal. It just wasn't really there. We were all just like oh, let's just pick up from where we left off and we'll be fine. And we weren't.
When you look at successful captains, there are certain attributes, certain characteristics that we can look at and say that is a good captain, that's a good leader. When you are attempting to lead a team through something as completely off the rails unpredictable as COVID was and proved to be, how does your interpretation of being a captain change?
Yeah, I mean, I think,
And kind of as an aside, how do you know that you're doing it right?
yeah, because I think a lot of times you measure the success of a captain by how a team works on the field. Not just are they winning, but how are they communicating on a field? How are they working together? How are they uplifting one another? And we didn't have that. And so I was really trying to navigate the off the field components of being a captain without a lot of guidance and without a lot of really knowledge about how to do it. And we also, like, at the time we didn't need captains. Like, we weren't allowed to have captains practices. We weren't playing games. We weren't doing anything. So I was kind of like making up a role for myself because what I was supposed to be doing as a captain wasn't there anymore. Um, I think hindsight, I really just should have spent so much more time getting to know my teammates and letting them know I was there for them. I think that's the biggest thing you can do as a captain is just letting each and every single one of your teammates know that they're cared about and loved and valued. And because if that's all you're doing as a captain, then at least each one of your teammates knows that. I have teammates who never felt valued on my team, and I really view that as a failure of me, because if anybody should have been doing it, should have been the coach. But if the coach isn't doing it, it's the captains. They should be the ones saying, "Hey, I love you and I value you, regardless of if you get playing time, regardless of if you score a goal or not. And thank you for being here." And I was so caught up in the people who weren't showing up and who weren't being positive that I kind of ignored and neglected my teammates who were. Um, when I look at captains and just like leaders in general that I really look up to and admire, it's the people who, one, show up and get their stuff done on the field, that are just like amazing athletes and are able to have that dedication to their sport, but are also the ones who their teammates know that they can look to when they need something. Um, and that's, I think, where I was lacking more. I think I have good work ethic, and my teammates know that I love the sport and I work hard, but they didn't know that I loved them and that I was there for them. And I think that's kind of where I failed as a captain a little bit. And that's where, because I was not modeling that behavior and the other captains weren't modeling that behavior, the team wasn't modeling that behavior, right? It has to start from the top. And it wasn't for us.
I think that there was another sentence in your article where you were talking about how your depression and anxiety related to what happened with COVID manifested as anger.
Yeah.
When we're talking about, like we were, soft coaching styles, captains who take the entire team into account,
Yeah.
when you have a captain whose mental health manifests as anger, I mean, I'm sure that wasn't a healthy team dynamic.
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all. And I think that's something it's taken me a long time to realize, but I'm a fairly anxious human being. It is one of the things I dislike the most about myself. Trying to work on it, but um my anxiety manifests in needing to control and needing to know what's going on. And when I wasn't able to control anything on my team and things weren't going well, I got so irritable and so angry. And I didn't have the skills at the time. The only skill I had to deal with that was to take a break and to walk to the side of my field and breathe. You can't do that all the time. You can only do it like once a practice before people start staring at you. Um, and so I didn't really know how to navigate that. But I also at the time did not realize that my anger is rooted in my own anxiety, not in what my teammates were doing. I didn't have the vocabulary to say that. And so I can only imagine what my teammates were thinking and feeling. And so, yeah, I wish I had known better about the importance of communicating about my own mental state. I didn't. I thought I could just kind of bluff my way through. I didn't think that I could be a captain if I was depressed or anxious, or had any mental illness. And so I felt like I had to be perfect. I had to be ready. And I also felt like it was on me. I had to be the one to lead my team because no one else can do it. That wasn't the case. And it was a flawed way of thinking, and it ultimately really hurt me. But yeah, the anger that I felt when things went wrong, and it wasn't always, sometimes I would lash out, sometimes I would say things, but because I'm so vocal and I'm an out loud processor, a lot of times it was me just saying things under my breath of like, that's stupid, or you're wrong, or nope, that was a really bad pass. Even if I was talking to myself, my teammates still heard it, and they didn't know that I was talking to myself. And I just became so unpleasant to be around. Um, and because I was so unpleasant to be around, I didn't get to know my teammates. I didn't get to be around them, and I was just begging for anybody to, be my friend, and nobody was. And I don't blame myself. I was like, who would want to be around me when I'm acting like this? And so it just, again, that self-isolation came in, and that, kind of internal frustration with myself really stopped me from being able to reach out and form those connections with my teammates.
When you're coupling coming back from COVID, being a captain on the team with this perfectionism and your need for control, and then also this depression and anxiety and the manifestation of anger, where was your headspace during junior year?
Oh, it was kind of everywhere. It's weird. I don't remember a lot of my junior year. I've kind of blacked it out. I would say that during season, it was just, we started off on a really, really strong note. We won our first 2 or 3 games of season, which was like awesome. I was like, okay, look at us. Like, we're fine. We're totally okay. Um, and then it just kind of, I don't know, fizzled out, I guess. It was really hard for us to get over our losses. When we lost a game, it felt very personal. And we didn't really have a good system of dealing with, okay, we lost a game, now what? It was kind of like we either ignore it and we're like, oh, well, next game, or we just stay so focused on that loss that we weren't able to be ready for the next win. And I know for me during junior year, I really was just trying so hard to keep it together. I, tried so hard to just keep my head down, to keep focus. That I was really avoiding a lot of these outside factors. Um, I think probably most people would have been able to tell that something was off with me, but because only a select few of my teammates really like knew me at that point, it was, I think, really difficult for anybody to see how much I was struggling. And I think on top of that, I have always kind of been in this headspace of like, I don't have it that bad. Like, yeah, I have a mental illness, but it's not that bad. And some people have it way worse. And that was kind of something that I really latched onto during my junior year. I was like, I might be not well, but I'm not suicidal right now. I'm still eating, I'm still sleeping, I'm still doing these things. those other teammates aren't. And so I'm not the problem. They're the problem. They're the ones that aren't dealing with their issues. And so the more I was able to do that and really pinpoint it's not that bad for me, the more I kind of like avoided all of the signs that my depression was getting worse and worse and worse.
What was your first interaction with mental health on campus? Did you was the athletic department providing mental health resources? Was there a counselor for the entire university? What was happening? And you were dealing with the ramifications of COVID happening
Yeah.
anyway.
I don't really remember talking a lot about about mental health from the athletic department. I don't remember it as whole. I remember my freshman year, we had a sports psychologist come to a practice and talk with us about just really like basic things, how the brain works, how to keep control of your brain during, high stress moments, things like that. She may have come and talked once or twice. Junior year was interesting because there was a really big onus on mental health from my coach's point of view, because a lot of it was inspired by the fact that the previous year and even earlier on in 2021 and 2022, so many student athletes had died by suicide. And those headline stories of Division I athletes taking their own lives really, I think, sparked a desire to have a conversation about it. So I would say that like on the surface, there was a conversation about mental health on my team. It was very surface level, and it was also, I don't think, done as well as it could have been. Again, I try really hard not to be critical of, my coach. It was her first season as a head coach, so I want to give a lot of grace to her figuring things out and doing what she thought was best. But a lot of the talks about mental health that we ended up having were just like trauma dumps of people talking about like their worst experiences of their lives. And, oh, this is the time that I thought I was going to kill myself. And this is a time that I had a really bad eating disorder. But there wasn't any, it wasn't productive. It wasn't done in a way that gave people the space to deal with those things and to hear. It was just kind of like, look what I've gone through. Look how terrible it was, but I'm still here. So love me. And that was kind of like the way. I don't think anybody was intentional about doing that, but that's how it was done. And so we had a few of those conversations in season. And then out of season, I remember vividly having a meeting where we were brought into a room and we watched like a TED talk about mental health. And I think it was actually one of the TED talks by the founder of Hidden Opponent. And we were then like sharing like what it was like, and what we gained from the video. And I just remember sitting there and being so like, this is so stupid, because literally an hour before this, I was on the phone on the floor of my bathroom having a panic attack. And I didn't feel safe to share that. I didn't feel like anybody actually would have cared. And then we went and the team went bowling after that or something. So it was like, again, I think there was a lot of desire to talk about mental health, but the resources to do it well were not there. My school had at the time 3 counselors, one of which had a specialty in sports psychology. She never came and talked to my team. It was just sort of like, if you need to go to a counselor, she's there. But it was about a 2-week waiting period to get in to see her. And then you could only ever see her or any of the school therapists every 2 weeks, because they were servicing the entire campus, not just, so there was not one person who was only seeing student athletes. And then, yeah, it was very, and like I said, we didn't have an assistant coach at the time. So it was also like, you can either talk to the head coach or, the trainers that we have. So yeah, it kind of felt very sparse in terms of what our resources are. And then I will say, I also kind of felt that even if my head coach did care, she didn't have the time to deal with it, right? Like she was coaching us all on, and she didn't have any help. So it was also kind of a sense of like, do I even bother her with this information? And then when I did, nothing happened. It wasn't productive in any way. So yeah, it was kind of up to me to navigate whatever I was dealing with.
And so much of mental health is maintenance. I
Yeah.
mean, it's not like you can get into a situation where you do all gather as a team and trauma dump. Like, that's not productive. And it also doesn't normally deal with the day-to-day upkeep of mental health.
Right. There wasn't really a conversation into how to bring about mental well-being on the field and how to bring in, practices of mental health during our, physical practice. There wasn't a lot of talk of how to care for your mind and your emotions. It was really just like kind of a blanket statement of if you need something, you're here. You have off days if you need them. If you ever have something going on, you can come and talk. But like you were saying, there was no maintenance about it. And I remember um just posting all these like infographics and things like that. And I was like, this is a really good first step. I feel a little bit seen. But where's like the change when I say that my mental health isn't doing well because of something that's going on the field? There was no change there. And I remember my senior year, we had a conversation as a team of if we wanted to stop talking about mental health because it was doing more harm than good. And everyone on the team like was like, we can't talk about this anymore. Like it's not, and it's because it wasn't being done in a productive way, in a way that actually provided help to anybody. We were just all like, of course, nobody wants to get into a room and hear about all the worst moments of their teammates' lives. Like, it's so sad. And it's so, it messes with your mind so much. And also, if you're dealing with suicidal ideations or you're dealing with an eating disorder, hearing about somebody else's struggle with it and then not really knowing what they did about it isn't super helpful. It's just sort of like, okay, good. I'm gonna be okay, I guess, because you were okay, so I'll just have to be okay. And so yeah, and again, I think that's just really just goes back to a lack of education, um, of how to deal with these things. How do you support athletes who are having these struggles, but also how do you create, like, what can you do during a practice to stop and say, let's do a mental check, let's do you know, we would call them vibe checks. And I remember just ending up hating them because I was like, I don't want to talk about my mental state right now. I just want to get through practice. And it would always frustrate me. And so, yeah, it was kind of a weird thing. And I remember I actually went and talked to my athletic director about my experiences before I published my hidden opponent article. And he was like, this is really weird. I thought the field hockey team was doing so great. I thought you guys are like leading the charge on mental health awareness. And I was like, on the surface, but where is the actual support for athletes? Like, where is a designated psychologist to come in and talk to teams? Where are the forced off days of, hey, you're not doing okay. You need to go see somebody. Your coach isn't a therapist. They can only do so much. And so it was kind of a weird thing where on the one hand everybody was like looking to us as the leaders of talking about mental health on a team, but so many of us were struggling and not knowing what to do about it.
When you approach teammates and coaches and their response is just don't be anxious.
Yeah.
And then you approach your athletic director and they go, oh, I thought you guys were doing the best on campus.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you say as a leader, not only on your respective team, but also within the athletic department? I mean, you're now an upperclassman.
Yeah. Um, Probably gonna cry talking about this next part, but I remember
Bring it on.
so vividly having a moment where it was the first time I contemplated suicide. And it scared me. And anyone who's been in that position, when it first happens, a lot of times you're aware enough that you're like, this is crazy. Like, what are you thinking? And I'm really lucky that that was my response. And I was like, this is not okay. and I need help. And I remember not knowing who to go to. And I went to my coach and I was like, I am not doing okay. I need help. And she was like, yeah, I hear you. It's been a lot going on. Hang in there. And then there was nothing after that. There was no follow up. There was not a text. There was not a check in. And even worse for me was when I went to my co captains and said, I need help. I need help carrying this burden of being a captain. I need help leading and I need your help. And they were like, why? And I was like, I am not doing well. I'm feeling suicidal. And the co captain's response was like, I don't get that. What do you mean? And I was just like, you're supposed to be my friend. And it was really hard. It was a really big awakening for me of who I should put my trust in and who I should put faith in. Um, and it was a really big moment for me in which I realized how much I had lost sight of myself and of my own core values. And it really just became unbearable for me. And I'm very thankful I was able to get off campus and, I was able to go be with my parents, who are my biggest supporters, and who were so kind with me. But yeah, it's really hard to think about how much trust I had put in those people who clearly didn't really care about me that much. And I think I still hold a lot of resentment about that. I think that resentment played a big role as to why I ended up giving up my position of being a captain. And to why my senior year was so difficult for me is because I wasn't able to really realize, oh, I'm really bitter about these things and I'm really bitter about how I was treated. Props to my athletic director though, when I told him that it was at the end of my senior year when I talked to him, and his reaction was his first thing that he said was, I'm so sorry. And you can only know what you know. And so my biggest thing when I decided to share my story was that if it can help one athlete not have to go through this, but also if it can change how we talk to athletes about mental health, then it's worth it. Like, then this is all worth it. And, when I had a really hard time deciding if I was going to do this podcast, because part of me was like, what's the point? Like, I don't want to keep digging up this old stuff that happened. I don't want to like get people in trouble or make them feel bad. But I do think it needs to be talked about. And I do think my experience is not the only one. I'm not the only person who reached out for help and was kind of like ignored. And I think, and I'm also not the only person on my team who was, struggling and didn't know what to do. And was just kind of silently going through the motions. So yeah, it was a really frustrating time for sure. And I think it just shifted so much of what I value and the people that I hold close to me.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I do spend a lot of episodes of this podcast talking about self-harm and suicidal ideation, normally as it relates to a lack of playing time or some form of communication that was left unopened. And I think that your story is unique, but it's not alone.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the weirdest things is I think there is this kind of attitude of indifference when athletes are performing well and when things are going well. My team made it to playoffs. It was the best we ever did. We had a winning record. We had a great season. As far as, I mean, especially for being our third season that we played. But my team was broken. I was probably one of the people that was most vocal about my struggles. but I was certainly not alone. I was certainly not the only one. The amount of teammates I had that reached out to me and said, I did not know you were feeling this way, because I was feeling the same way the entire time. But also the amount of teammates who I actively watched, struggle with, one of my closest friends on the team struggled with an eating disorder for some time. And I remember watching her pass out and, not be able to stop, because I mean, when you don't know, and as athletes, we're so go, 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 go. We don't stop ourselves ever. So that, and I was like watching that happen. I was watching another teammate, perform the best she's ever done and then go home and cry herself to sleep because she didn't think it was good enough and she wasn't getting any sort of validation. And it's just like, when I think about it, it was so easy to ignore it because they were our best players and they were our stars on the field. And as long as they kept going, and then, of course, when they inevitably didn't perform their best, it was like, oh my gosh, what's going on with her? She is, a train wreck. She's not doing good. What an issue. And so I was so afraid, because I'd been on the other side of that conversation of when I was sitting with my coach being and talking about, how bad other players were doing. I was like, I can't show that I'm struggling, because if for a second that happens, I'm going to be put on the bench. I'm going to be, taken out. And there was such a fear, I know, of all of us that, keep going until you absolutely can't, because if you stop, then, what's going to happen?
There was another sentence in your article where you were talking about giving 100% of yourself and that being the only option.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're trying to lead a team that is so visibly shattering pieces of itself, and you're also going through that. I mean, you weren't immune to this. You weren't looking at it from an unbiased perspective. When you're
Yeah.
trying to lead a team through that, where do you start?
Um, I think hindsight, even the beginning of my senior year, I wish that we had just stopped and had a moment where we talked about not only like not just like our issues and like what had been going on, but we also talked about how we want to see the team change, how we want to grow. I think that's a huge thing, is like really taking the time to value everybody's voices. And another thing for me that I've really realized is taking the time to do that throughout the season. You know, Sometimes you're going to get more done sitting in the locker room talking than you are going to be doing the same drills over and over again out on the field. And so many of my teammates got to their mental and emotional capacity before we ever got to our physical capacity. Um, and we just didn't know how to reset and recharge ourselves. And if you are a collegiate athlete, you've worked your butt off to get to that point and you are used to playing through pain. You just keep going. And so for somebody to say, well, you have an off day if you need it, like if you really think you need it, it's there. It's an option, but it always kind of felt like a cop out. And it to also say that like we don't care, take a day, is not true. Because if you've ever had a teammate not show up to practice because they have too much homework, you're like, oh my, I have homework too. Like, what are you doing? Like it's not an unbiased thing. It's not something you can do without repercussions, as much as your coach may say it is. And so I will say I never felt like I actually had the option to take an off day. I remember there was a day during preseason my senior year, I was throwing up constantly. And I was like, I'm still going to practice. Like, I can still play. And my athletic trainer was like, you cannot practice. You like, no. And so I think sometimes you need somebody to do that for you. You need somebody to say, stop. You are not okay. And no, you can't just go to practice and pretend that it's normal. I remember my head coach my freshman year had a rule that if you take a practice out for, mental health reasons, you cannot come back until you've scheduled an appointment with a sports psychologist or a counselor or a therapist. And I just think of like that is kind of what you should be doing. Like you're not going to sit out of practice because you broke your ankle and then just come back the next practice without having gone to a doctor. And I wish that there was somebody who had looked at me and cared more about me as a human than me as a player and said, I don't care if you miss the next 8 games. You're not okay and you need to go get that sorted. Because I think it would have saved not only myself a lot of pain, but my team a lot of pain. I wouldn't have been hurting other people unintentionally. And I think that's something I hold so much resentment towards myself over is I know that I hurt my teammates. I know that I hurt my team. And I wish I hadn't. I can't go back and undo that. I've tried really hard to make amends and to, start over with my team. But at the same time, it's hard. We're imperfect people. So this mentality for me of going 100% all the time is weird because it's like an inevitable thing and it's weirdly toxic, but it's also like what makes great players great is their ability to go all in and just do it. And so I wish someone had told me that going all in doesn't mean I have to sacrifice my mental well-being.
Wow. You are so unbelievably candid. And like
Yeah.
it's episodes like yours that make me so happy that I get to do this podcast.
Thanks. Yeah.
Because I mean, I talk about vulnerability every week, and these athletes are kind of in varying states of, I don't want to say, I'm trying to find the right word for it, but they're just kind of in a variety of states of working through these mental challenges.
Yeah.
And some of them, it's been years and they can still tell me exactly how they felt. I
Yeah.
mean, these are topics that don't go away, and although they may wax and wane, they're going to stay with you. And when you have a whole team that's dealing with that with really no outlet,
Yeah.
I mean, where do you go from there?
I think a big thing for me has been therapy. I am very lucky that I've been able to find a therapist that works really well for me. And she has helped me so much be able to kind of contextualize the things that I was dealing with, but also to learn to give myself the grace to not be perfect. That's a really hard thing for me. And so I'm really grateful for that opportunity. Not everyone, I recognize that's a huge privilege. But I think another thing that I've realized on my team is so scary is this idea of accountability and holding one another to a standard. Because I think a lot of people are afraid of being held accountable because it makes, oh, well, if I'm being held accountable, I'm going to be called out for my mistakes and I'm going to be, and I think looking back, that's something all of us were really afraid of. We're afraid of failing, but also of someone else noticing we weren't perfect. I don't think that was just something I was struggling with. And I think I've tried really hard in my life to tell people, hey, if I can be better, like help me be better. But that's something that as competitors is really difficult to do. It's difficult to ask for help to be a better person at all. Um, and yeah, I just think that's something I have worked really hard to do is recognize that I'm imperfect. And as mad as I am at myself for how I let things get, and as mad as I am for how things ended for me in my athletic experience, I also have been trying really hard to give myself the grace of I didn't know. And I'm also human and I was figuring things out. And I was, 20 years old at the time. And in the grand scheme of life, that's not very old. Um, like so it's definitely really difficult. It's like I said, it's really hard for me not to be bitter, especially towards my some of my teammates and my coaches that I have really felt like have harmed me. And so it's giving them the grace of they were also learning and it's not their fault. It's not on them. It's hard. But I think when I look at how we talk about athletics, this idea of grace for one another and learning has to be a part of that. It has to come with the mental health professionals on every campus, the off days, all the things that the experts are telling us that we need to do. There also has to be some grace given to athletes. And I know if I just had one teammate come to me and say, "Hey, you're going to be okay. It's all right that you're messing up," it would have made such a difference to me. So yeah, it's a weird thing to be okay with, but I wish that more people were okay with holding themselves and one another accountable.
Once you started having teammates come to you and say you weren't struggling alone, where did the team dynamic go from there?
You know, um, it's hard because I think there is a lot of baggage on my team, a lot of things that people need to work through. I mean, in general, I think everybody needs to be in therapy. I think my teammates probably need some too. And so I honestly don't know. It's really scary to say to somebody, I was also struggling with that. It's even scarier when it's your teammate who is vying for your same position, who you feel like you're competing with. Um, my team is going through a lot of changes right now. We just graduated our first ever class, which is huge. We also got a brand new head coach, brand new assistant coach, and we're bringing in like 8 new recruits. So I'm really, really hopeful that, the team is able to grow, um, and be more vulnerable. I know for me, it felt so much less scary once I knew that I wasn't alone in it and that other people were on my side. I felt so alone at the time. And so it's hard to know what's going to happen. I wish nothing but the best for my team. I love each and every one of them so much it like hurts me at times. And I want them all to succeed so badly. Um, but I also know that's not going to happen without a lot of hard work. And that's not just on the field. It's, personal and uh teamwork just every single day working with one another. So yeah,
So
I don't know. I'm really hopeful though.
that's 3 head coaching changes in 4 years.
Yep.
I mean, with the last 9 minutes of this, tell me how that is going to impact the conversations that need to be had.
It's something that I have been reaching out to my younger teammates a lot about, especially the ones I'm really close with, where I'm like, 3 head coaches in 4 years is insane. It's so difficult to do. It's a lot of change. I think a lot of my teammates are really hopeful that this is going to be kind of like a fresh start. So the second head coach in our program was our first assistant coach. So she was promoted. So it wasn't really like it was like the different head coach, but the same coaching-ish style. And so I think a lot of girls are really hopeful that this is a brand new head coach. He's from outside. Um, but yeah, I don't know. It's definitely difficult to, because on the one hand, it is an opportunity where this old coach doesn't know about all these things, but you can only use that if you're also willing to forgive and forget and move forward as, a new team and as a new program. So I don't know. It's kind of in their hands of if they're going to be willing to, and it's hard. Don't get me wrong. It is hard to be like, I'm going to put aside all of these grievances and all of these issues that we've accumulated over the past 2 to 3 years, and start anew. But I think ultimately that grace we have to give one another is just so important. So yeah, I'm really excited to watch them though. Yeah.
It's almost like you can't move on until you've healed.
Yeah, it's weird. And that's something that I have been struggling a lot with. And it's at what point do I move on? It's something that I remember feeling so desperately like I needed to burned down the world when I got done with my senior season. I was so mad with how I was treated. I was so sad. And I was like, I just need to tell everybody. And I remember I couldn't let it go. Every single time somebody would bring up, my coach or the team, I would just start on this rampage and this long rant of, oh my gosh, yeah, let me talk about it for forever. I think I'm finally getting to a point where I'm like, it's not my battle anymore. It's not my responsibility. There was a lot of things over my college career there were a lot of bags I picked up and carried that I never should have. And this is one that I feel like for so long, I felt like, oh, this is my responsibility again. So it's kind of giving myself it's okay to drop it and it's okay to move past it. It's hard when there's not resolution. That's something I am very justice oriented. And it's really difficult for me when there isn't a resolution to an issue. There's no change. Like, okay, well, nothing changed. So how can I just be okay with it? Like, it's really difficult for me. But I think it's just like focusing on the fact that I have things moving forward that I'm excited about and are going to be good for me. And it's just not my battle anymore. It's not my place anymore. As sad as it is, because I kind of wish I could go back this fall and play with them again. But
Yeah,
it's good.
it's interesting when I speak with athletes who are recently removed from their sport. The episode tends to be a lot of healing.
Yeah.
And that's an incredible process to see happen because they spend the entire hour or hour and a half or however long the episode is talking me through all of this incredible strife.
Yeah.
And then at the end they're like, yeah, and that was the old me. And now I'm changed and I'm healed. And there are so many stories like that, but there are also so many people who have who need more time to heal because like the healing process isn't I graduated, now the rest of my life can begin.
Yeah. I'm definitely still healing. I think it's an ongoing process. I think a huge part of my healing process has been able to say, no, this did happen to me. It was real. I didn't make it up. I wasn't, lying about it. I think for so long I was kind of gaslit into believing that it wasn't that bad. And that's terrible. But I think the more that I'm able to talk about it, and also just for me, a huge part of my healing process is hoping that change does come, even if I don't have a hand in it, even if I'm not the one making the changes. I think the more we talk about the fact that athletes are humans and they have mental health challenges as much as anybody else does, the more that athletes who are still going through it, I just hope they won't have to struggle like I did or like so many other athletes have.
Wow. Let me see when your episode is coming out.
Okay.
I think you have until October.
Okay, cool.
So I think you have a while.
Okay.
I'm done with the questions I have to ask. Is there anything else that you think that I missed about your story? Anything that you would like to add? Any gaps that you would like to fill in your timeline?
No, I think one thing that I've always struggled with is, am I mentally ill because of my sport, or was I mentally ill and then the field hockey just kind of made it worse? And I think that's something that like I've always felt the two go hand in hand. And so as sad as it is for any athletes out there listening, your mental health issues aren't going to go away when you stop playing your sport. Even if I was so hoping that they would, but it's okay that they don't. And as hard as it is, this is like something that I've realized my anxiety is a part of me, and that's okay. It's all right. And I'm learning to grow with it and to be a better person because of it. So that's all I would say is it's okay to be not okay. As cheesy as that sounds.
What a way to end it, though. I mean,
Yeah.
like, that really is the overarching.
Yeah. And you
That
know what? Like a huge part of it too for me has been like I really am like I'm about to move out of the country. Like I'm about to start like a whole new life, and it's not so much running away from my problems as it is growing from them and just learning that, as sucky as my time was, there was still a lot of beauty in it. There's a lot of grace in it. Um, you gotta have the good with the bad. And so I'm just really hopeful that my team is able to grow and, just really come into their own as an organization. And I'm excited to see what the future of the program holds.